I hope I got the beginning of that bit. I should like plan a way to make it so the beat coordinates when I start talking. But I think that's way too professional for me, you know? Your old friend Carlz here trying to, as far as I know, the only show where the same bald guy takes whatever thought he had about a movie in Spanish and try to make them work in English. Not that they shouldn't work, but sometimes it, it's hard, sometimes it's easy. This week, I kept thinking about the concept of metaphysics. Um, as someone who dedicated like a big chunk of his adult life to philosophy, metaphysics has always been this kind of like strange ghost. Because when you are dedicated to it, even more so a professional, I can't ever consider me a professional on metaphysics, even though uh, I could consider myself a philosopher. It's just how my mind works and my creativity kind of works. The thing is, metaphysics. Nowadays we just believe is this kind of like ethereal thing. It's either too intellectual or it's either too fantastic, and I don't know, people just get scared or like push away when they hear the word, because you think about 700-page books of old white guys from Germany or something, which, well, to no offense and to do the proper respect, these guys were, to me, like some of the coolest people on that have ever lived. The way their mind works and the way we are taught to think about philosophy is about this sort of replicating, self absorbing way of existing, where we go thought after thought after thought, and we see the connections of our minds, but not in a biological way, but in an intellectual way. We are layered creatures, human beings, mentally, I mean, like intellectually. And our layers are made out of connections. Between these connections and between the levels you create among them is where metaphysics lives. This is all beyond just talking about our bodies. But here's the catch, a very fun catch from like almost any perspective. I think we do metaphysics every day. And I think sometimes we think like the academic side of metaphysics has taken hostage, or is the only one that has any right to that, because in academia, metaphysics are connected by the strong bonds of logic and due process and the scientific method, because we want to be thorough with what we are saying, because often what we're saying is super important, even though probably 99% of humanity doesn't give a shit about it. I think we philosophers are probably like the least liked type of people, and we owe that to ourselves. Well, now there's modern ethicians, like people that do ethics and moral commentary. Those are more famous. They knew how to like branch out and talk about relevant things. But here's my point: we do metaphysics every day, and how do we do it? We do it mostly by narrating our lives, our existence, and by sharing our experience. Our experience is necessarily metaphysic, as we are human beings that work in these magical mystery levels of thought. And one of the things that happen with metaphysics is that often you won't realize it's happening. You know, often you would go around living stories or like experiencing life in a metaphysical manner, but you don't really know it. Here's the thing: when you realize that you are in a metaphysical exercise, the shock can be a lot. And that is basically what a movie like Hamnet is. The way this movie is crafted is metaphysical in concept, but also artistic and poetic at the same time. It's a tricksy movie. It tricks you. It tricks you in a good sense. It tricks you through his kind of like even bland or like dry historical narrative, and some characters that begin in such a basic manner but they start growing, some characters that aren't even in the movie and they still grow with the story. This is kind of like a brilliant way of putting this. So for those of you who don't know, Hamnet is kind of like a fictional biopic of William Shakespeare. But here's the first big catch. It's not a traditional biopic, and it's not mostly about Shakespeare, but it's mostly about his wife, who is called why did I forget? I forgot it also for my Spanish episode, and I hate myself for it. Agnes, played by Oscar-winning Jessie Buckley. So my argument is that Hamnet is a highly metaphysic story or movie, basically because what they did was trick us by mixing and sort of changing the way a layered biopic should work. So the first deceit they do, as I said, is not making it about Shakespeare. Even more so, I'm not a drama expert, I'm not a fan of the theater. I know who William Shakespeare is in general. I've never read the actual plays. I've seen classic adaptations, Romeo and Juliet. I saw one couple of Hamlet movies. But the deception from Hamnet begins even with the title. So let's put us in that perspective. You are a random person who knows about Shakespeare in a very broad, general way. If you see 3/4 of Hamnet, first of all, you can easily go through them without knowing he is Shakespeare. There's kind of like a revealing or a revelation of this deception by the fact that they don't keep throughout the movie. They don't go every time he's Shakespeare. They don't name him. They don't highlight him. They don't make it a big deal who he is. The way both Agnes and Shakespeare are connected throughout most of the movie is a way of kind of like victimization. 3/4 of the movie are Hamlet are Shakespeare living his life, gathering this frustration and this drama that fuel his work. And then a normal biopic would put you in the position of Shakespeare, and it would put you behind him creating these plays. But in a brilliant twist of not twist of fate, but in a brilliant twist, Hamnet does not. They stay with Agnes, they stay with the family, so they stay with what inspired Shakespeare, but not with Shakespeare. And you, as I said, I didn't know about Shakespeare's background, so I wouldn't know if this was actually his life, if this was correct, if this was factual. I had no idea. Even more so, I wasn't even sure the movie was about Shakespeare until they named him almost by the end of the movie. The third act of the movie, which is phenomenal. Like probably the best, one of the best third acts in any movie I've ever seen. It's like a revelation. It's almost like a shock. You like Agnes goes to London. This is a spoiler-filled review, by the way, because I gotta talk about the ending. So she gets to London, and the first time they go like, who are you looking for? And she goes like, William Shakespeare. And that doesn't happen until almost the end of the movie, as I said, the beginning of the final act. And even though you already might have had an intuition about it, maybe if you knew more about Shakespeare, you knew it was him, that shit is a shock. Because as I said, it reveals the big trick that I'm not gonna show you Shakespeare, I'm gonna show you his inspiration. Mostly his family and his children. It's really fun to think about it because by making the focus of the movie Agnes, you see almost like one side of it. By the end of the movie, half of the movie till the end, they get into this squabble because Shakespeare has to leave their town. He has to go to London because he's an artist, right? So we can see him struggling, living this mundane life. We see him, but then he leaves, and we don't really see his life in London. We only see Agnes suffering and having all this toil and tribulations with the family in their house. So by almost the end of the movie, the beginning of the third act, Shakespeare comes home and they just clash fundamentally. And it's so brilliant because at that point you feel like he's the villain of the movie. You feel it. You feel like he's the villain of the movie. So when the third act begins, and she goes looking for him, and she starts seeing where he lives, how he lives in a really like humble, austere manner. Austere, yeah, that's a word. But like in a really humble manner. Like they even make the point of saying like, oh, he's one of the richest men, or like he's so successful, but he lives in a small room. He's always alone. So there you see everything in plane coming together, and then you see how what they like Chloe Zhao and company, what they choose to show you was the very core of the suffering that inspired Shakespeare. That is not necessarily like he's not a victim of his circumstances. He shows part of it. You see, you can see the existential clash of him having the desire to create, to be an artist, but to do so having to sacrifice so much, and that sacrifice on itself being the source of inspiration for his art. I keep thinking that he might have been the first emo in modern history. You know, because life certainly sucks. He's miserable, but that is the only way he can imagine existing. His art, his miserable art. You know? But anyways, this still goes to prove or be in a support of the argument that this is a highly metaphysic movie. Because as I said, we don't really see things through the eyes of Shakespeare that much. We have some kind of like, is it like fan service? He uses some of his classic lines, to be or not to be or whatever. But above everything, what they show us are images of emotions and sensations. So, as the movie title implies, the climax of the movie, of course, ends up when he writes Hamlet, that is based on Hamnet, his son. I'm not even sure if this is factual or not, but he writes Hamlet as a tribute to his son who dies, and he's not there to be with him when he dies, or like to be of any comfort for the family when he dies. he lives this existential dread of being something, but in order to do so, having to lose part of his own self, which was his son. So he writes the play to not necessarily be a tribute to his son, not necessarily to kind of like show who he was or anything. He writes the most masterfully play where he kind of like shows the ending of his son. The tragedy of Hamlet is like a projection of the tragedy of his son. But because obviously the story of Hamlet is way bigger. I'm talking about the movie, okay? I'm not talking, I haven't read, I haven't seen, I mean, I've seen a couple of adaptations of Hamlet in movies, but I haven't read, I'm not an expert in Hamlet, I'm just talking about the movie. And in the movie, the play Hamlet is kind of like Shakespeare's tribute, ask for forgiveness, what else? It's a whole thing, it's a whole layer thing that not only acknowledges his son's life and pays tribute to it, but also expresses his feelings towards him, the way he could never do it. And the tragedy is so strong because this is all things he didn't get a chance to say. And here's the thing, let's keep track of all this meta commentary, right? We don't show Shakespeare, we are only show the reasons for him to write in. Then we're shown the play, but we are not explained the play. And this is something that I found to be really interesting. In a way, since these plays are written in all English, me as an ESL person, it's already hard to understand some British English or some like strong accent English in general. But I shit you not, when they show scenes from Hamlet in the movie, which is already meta enough if you're keeping track of the metaphysic kind of like thingies, I couldn't understand shit of what they're saying. The context they give you in the movie is not enough to explain the mental process that Shakespeare does in order to write Hamlet. It's not enough. There is something in between that you are not told. Between these layers of metaphysics, there is something there that you are not told, and you can feel it. Because you're watching this movie, you're watching a play inside of the movie, and you're watching actors saying lines that you barely understand. But even if you don't understand the lines, you feel the lines. This might sound cheesy as fuck because it probably is, but it's true. You feel the lines. There's one scene where Shakespeare is kind of like correcting or giving notes or indications to the actor who's playing Hamlet, and he can't get the right emotion of it. And Shakespeare is like, you gotta do it like that, you gotta feel the emotion. And of course, because he's trying to make this actor portray what he thinks were the possible emotions of his son as he's about to die and go to the great beyond, in a way. How can you possibly make someone understand that? How can you possibly make someone express that? It's nigh impossible, isn't it? So we have this meta commentary, or like this meta element inside the movie itself, because as I said many times, we are not really shown the mental process of Shakespeare. We just got there with Agnes. We get there by the climax of the movie. We get there as viewers. We get there with Agnes. So for us, Shakespeare is the bad guy. Shakespeare is a bastard, right? Like, and then we start getting shown these scenes of him suffering, but still we are like, yeah, but like he was still a jerk. Like he should have come back. He should have tried harder. And then we get to the climax of the movie. One of the most beautifully shot, beautifully performed scenes I've ever seen in film. I shit you not, why Chloe Zhao does in the climax of the movie is incredible. How she chooses the perspectives, she shows the whole theater making another meta commentary. We are watching a movie, so we are the audience for an audience watching a play. You know, it's an obvious meta commentary, but a commentary that is so easy to get connected with. So as Agnes comes and she starts seeing Hamlet, at the beginning she's shocked. She interrupts and she's like, that's my son, that's my son, that's my son. And she gets upset, like obviously upset, because we've seen her side of the experience. So it's almost like an insult to see someone playing her son. And as she begins to see and she begins to understand what this is. This is a meta commentary on her son that is not entirely her son, but it is her son. Then she sees Shakespeare playing the part of, I think it's the deceased king, right? As I said, I wasn't really even paying that much attention to Hamlet inside Hamnet. That wasn't the point. And that is why this scene is so well directed, because it's not about the play. You see, speaking of meta content, it's not about the play. And at some point, it's not even about the protagonist of the movie. It's about what's happening there. That collective emotion that the arts achieve. It's not only even only about theater or about film, but it's about the collective emotion of the audience. So we get to one of the climatic scenes of the play before Hamlet has to leave for like the other world or something, like some weird metaphor, right? And he's doing the scene that he was practicing with Shakespeare, and he's doing it fine, right? He's doing it okay. And by this point, Agnes is completely taken over by what Shakespeare wanted to do, by the nature of this dramatic tribute to his deceased son. And as the actor is saying his lines, Agnes is on the front row and she instinctively reached to him, successfully breaking the super mention, and now it's almost like a joke, breaking the fourth wall, introducing herself to the play. She reaches for Hamlet, her son, in a way, and he reciprocates. He touches her, and his performance transforms without him knowing necessarily that the woman he's reaching for is the mother of the fictional son that he's playing. But he gets moved. He's crying. And out of the blue, everybody else in the audience reaches for Hamlet. Do they all know who he's based on? Do they all know Shakespeare's motivations? Do they? You know, they all get into this collective catharsis. This is and this is the point of the movie that to me personally was shocking. Like, it broke me to the point of tears. I was like bawling, like, because I understood that 3/4 of this movie were a setup to create an empathy, a level of connection with the emotions of these characters. I have nothing to relate to these characters. They are old-timey, from a different country, like from a different culture. I could understand they making a focus on Agnes' contact with the earth to be this kind of like more pagan-based character, like not like classic Christian or anything, like none of that crap. Like, they make them real. They make them literally earthy. So, as the audience in the movie shares an emotional catharsis with the arts, you realize that that's you as well. You know? So you weren't watching Hamlet, you were watching Hamnet, but you understood through a complete different story not only what Shakespeare did, how he did it, but how he reached the people and why they felt the emotions through it. As I said, I don't know anything about Hamlet. I mean, again, I've seen some movies, but I keep forgetting. They always make the most boring Hamlet movies. And I know every theater guy, like, Sir Ian McKellen and everything, everybody loves Hamlet. It's like, I don't get it. But thanks to Hamnet, I kind of now know why they like it. But that's the point. And we're talking about metaphysics in the context of movies. What is more metaphysic than that? Layer after layer of interconnection between the story, the historical facts, the craftiness of the creation of an art piece, like a movie, makeup, dress, performances, and like eventually you get your own screen where you're watching the movie. You get all of that layers, only to get into the climax of the movie as if you were there. That is what shocked me to my very core and squeezed the tears out of me. I was there, and I was not only there like in the movie, but perhaps in reality. And then you sort of realize all of the moments in film where you've experienced something like that. All the times you've been moved to tears and cried, even maybe laughed in unison. For me, for example, was when I watched in theaters the end of The Return of the King. The theater was quite full. Those movies were big, but I knew that, like, out of 5 people, at least 2 of them were crying with me because they love The Lord of the Rings since you were a kid and you've lived in that imaginary world forever. And the other 2 people were just moved because the movie was moving. But it was a collective catharsis. It was a collective experience that only the arts can do. Hamnet shows, or like by the end of the movie, it's portrayed as a tribute to the arts. But it's the best thing about it is that its focus is not the art itself. As I said, it's not like, Okay, let's talk about how how Shakespeare did it, or let's talk about his creative thing. No, they choose to put the highlight on what's inspired him, not in him being inspired. So by the climax of the movie, you understood that. So it's not only a tribute to the arts, but it's also a tribute to you, the viewer, the spectator, and making this narration and making this effort, this creative effort to reach you. You know, for you to be Agnes, for you to reach in the screen. Am I reaching to you? Can you feel it? You know, and that revelation is incredible. It's a masterfully made climax, because the one thing they show about Shakespeare is not him like making a grandiose speech. It's not him trying to justify or anything. Like, it's not that. They show him listening backstage, merely hoping that he reached people, and his wife, because he saw her there. He's just there hoping he reached people with his story, with this emotional, passionate story that he wrote about his feelings about his dying son, that he will never ever get to say. You know, imagine the weight of that drama. As I said, he might have been the first modern emo, so he's just standing there hoping he reached you. And as you see that, and as I saw that sitting here in my desk watching my TV, I wish I could reach back and tell them they did. Tell Shakespeare, tell Paul Mescal and company, tell Chloe Zhao, tell all of them. They did. I was Agnes. I was them. You know? And if you got to feel that, that's something that is brilliant. And you can really, how can you say it? You can't really explain it. But as I said at the beginning, this is about metaphysics. You know? This is about the fact that I'm watching electronic pixels through a screen, right? But I'm trying my hardest to reach through the screen, to reach those emotions and to reach those feelings. You know, that is metaphysics. A different time, a different era, a different culture. You know, a story that even though it's logical, it's not pandering. It's not explicit. It's not just telling you what it is. It's offering you arguments that are highly metaphysics, that are obviously interconnected, but they are interconnected based on humanity, based on emotion. And that's metaphysics, man. But anyways, Hamnet is a brilliant movie. Even if the best part of it is like the last 20 minutes. The way those last 20 minutes reveal the machinations and creativity and like the Machiavellian plan behind the 3/4 of the movie. it shocks you back to watch back everything. How Hamnet loved to play swords, you know. Hamlet and his twin, their own connection, and how they played on creativity with one another, inspired by Shakespeare. Um, Agnes' connection to the earth and to reality, and how that made her emotions so raw and so easy to connect with. You know, the suffering birth gave to her. But because back in those days, women would be reduced to be mothers, but they are not showing that as something that was bad for her, or something to be criticized. But they are showing that in this occasion, for these particular people, we won't generalize and say it was the same for everyone, but for this case, being a mother was everything to her. Everything. Well, moms are mostly like that. They're like cool in that way. Well, you see, so in the end, we are like woken up by this climax, and the whole plan is revealed. And if you are like me, you get like slapped in the face with the weight of a plan well thought. Like, what was the line by the guy from the A Team? I love it when a plan comes together, because by God, it did. I haven't cried like that in a long time. And I remember, like, when the rest of the audience reached out, in my mind, it was like, that's me. It was like, that's me. They not only reach to Hamlet, but they reach to me as well. You know? But anyways, I really recommend this movie for everyone that loves not only film but theater, and I don't know, almost any other artistic expression. And I call on everyone to connect with the humanity in it. It would only make your spirit richer and your heart warmer. Because this fucking guy died like 1,000 years ago. And perhaps, I'm not saying that if you watch this movie you're gonna understand Shakespeare. Perhaps we never will. We never even know if this was the case. But 1,000 and thousands of years later, we will connect. I promise you. We will connect. And we will keep desiring and be driven to this metaphysical concentration of humanity. As I said at the beginning, this is how we express ourselves as a species. But even more important than that, this is how we connect. This is how we truly connect. Beyond touch, beyond senses. This is how we truly connect. Through the power of the mind. Thank you, Chloe Zhao and company. You certainly deserve the Oscar, even if it was only for the climax, more than one battle after another. I'm telling you. That's a good movie as well. I'm not gonna talk about it. But I'm telling you, these Hollywood guys, they get so caught up by trends. And in this case was this political commentary that they completely missed on this meta commentary on the job itself, on the art itself. To me, that's a crime. But anyways, that's another week from me. I hope you get a chance to look and watch to some good movie like Hamnet from, I don't know, from this past week or maybe the next week. You got a chance to feel, you had a chance to laugh, you had a chance to cry, you got a chance to experience the arts. That's my best wish from me to you. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one. See you next time. Bye bye.